Okay, I think we're going to get started. I know there might be some additional people that are still picking up goodies and they're on their way down.
A lot of them don't even look big.
Thank you everybody for coming. Good to see you. This is actually the second now in our series called Generosity in Action, Care for the Earth. And so today, last week, for those of you who are here, we focused on the idea of climate change. That was kind of the subject that we looked at. Today we're going to be talking about what faith leads us to do as Christians in this whole area of caring for the earth. And so we have with us this morning Buff Grace, and I'll read this, be sure I get it right here. Buff is Director of Faith Networks, a Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. Buff, welcome to Elk River Lutheran Church.
Thank you, Milo. Thank you. That's very kind of you. And thanks to Linda for the invitation. Linda contacted me way back in the spring to talk about that. I said, wow, that's a planning church. They really think ahead. That's fantastic. So thank you for having me today. We're going to talk today about the God-Earth-human relationship. We're going to look at Scripture a little bit and an ELCA social message that's been written about this topic. We'll talk about climate change and the consequences, and we'll talk about what are things we can do, how might we respond given the nature of this. Some of the slides I may skip just for the sake of time. My presentation here has maybe a little bit bigger time amount than we have today, so don't worry if I skip some slides. MNIPL is one of 40 affiliates across the country of an organization that started in the late 90s to address environmental issues and specifically climate change around particularly energy issues. We've been interfaith from the beginning. In Minnesota, we started in 2004. And we've been doing this ever since. We are one of the larger of the IPL affiliates across the country. And we do all kinds of work on the issues of environmental creation care and climate change. We have an office in the Twin Cities and one in Duluth, and we have groups that we're connected with in Rochester, St. Cloud, St. Peter, Mankato, in those areas. Our main work is to help congregations, Christian, Baha'i, Buddhist, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, you name it. We work with any people of faith and around climate change and environmental integrity. And we do that in a variety of ways. I'll talk about some of those a little later. So I want you to think a little bit about the fact that we're born into this world, and the first two assumptions that you can't get rid of as a human being is you are automatically tied to a mother and you are automatically tied to the planet. Those are just givens, right? And then, of course, we're also completely tied to God. We kind of have an option about whether we live into those relationships. But those relationships are just given for every human being that ever comes into existence. And we have some teachings from our scriptures and from our faith traditions about what that relationship looks like. What's the purpose of it? Why does it exist? What's the nature of it? How does it function? What's our responsibility and our gifts within that relationship? So take a moment, think about you don't have to think about all the places, just think about one good moment where you have experienced that relationship, where God, the earth, and another human were present in a moment for you. Take about 2 minutes each, pair up with somebody at your table, and just share that with one another. Just tell them take 2 minutes, I'll time us. Tell them about that experience. Okay, I'll begin to draw us back together. Thank you. I hope that helped you get into this space and get in touch with that relationship, because it is really the ground of all being. And sometimes when I ask that question, people say, oh, well, it was this time when my wife and I, or my husband and I, were on this beautiful landscape looking over the ocean, and we saw this huge sunset, and it was just, and sometimes it's as simple as, oh, it was when I was eating a tomato sandwich with my son, and it was out of our garden, and it was just the greatest thing in the world. Or, it can be the smallest moment or the largest moment. It doesn't really matter. It's that just getting in touch with that and hitting it right here where it really matters to us. We're going to go on with the presentation. I forgot to mention that we would welcome your email and name if you like. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, we send a couple of newsletters a month to let you know more about our organization. I'll just send that around. So what is, now that we've kind of gotten in touch with that place in our own life, what does Scripture say about that relationship? What are some of the things that Scripture says? Anybody, just throw it out. God created the heavens and the earth.
We are set to be stewards of the earth.
We're set to be stewards of the earth. How do we know? Where do we hear that?
I think it's in Genesis, I believe.
Genesis is probably the biggest, most well-known version of that, isn't it? Where God speaks directly to Adam and Eve and says, this is yours, and you're supposed to take care of it and be a gardener in it. Yeah, right. What else?
I think of so many of the Psalms. I mean, they just talk not only about the beauty of the earth, but, the relationship between, David or whoever was writing them and God and the earth. And it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. There's some beautiful poetry in there about the earth and all the creatures, and that wonderful Psalm 104. If you haven't read that one recently, go back and look at that. Psalm 104 is just this hymn to the creation about all the different things that God made. And God, one of the favorite lines in there is the Leviathan, the whale. And God just seems to have made that for the fun of it, just for sheer pleasure. Just can't believe that such a creature exists on the planet. Yeah. Anything else? Other ideas? One of the consistent threads through the Old Testament is that the earth and the chosen people are bound together. And whenever the chosen people are experiencing calamity, separation from God, they often experience that separation from the land. The land is in drought, it won't produce, or they're in exile, they're forced off of their land. It's just this deep, deep connection to the land that they have as a chosen people of God, and they see that as integral to that. Yeah. Any other ideas? Yep.
Well, God gave us other people to be with. And when, and you look at how they impact your life and what a gift that is and how beautiful it is.
Yeah, other people are part of that. We are not separate from the earth. We're part of that whole creation community. And we're siblings with one another, and we're siblings with the creation. Exactly. Yeah. Great. I want to raise up for you something you might not know about, but you should, because you should be really proud of it. And that's a statement that the Evangelical Lutheran Church wrote back in 1993. Well, this is years ago. They wrote about this relationship. And the church as a whole set people, theologians and people of faith, to work together to build a consensus about what does Scripture teach us about this, and how are we guided within this framework. And it's got much more in it than we can cover today, but I would lift it up for you. It's easy to find. You can just Google ELCA and creation care, and this statement will come up. You all may be familiar with social statements that your church writes. And this is a lovely one. And they actually mentioned climate change in this. Back in 1993, they were already cognizant that this was part of the issues that we face as a society around environmental integrity. And here's some of the high points. This statement offers a vision of God's intention for creation and humanity as creation's caregivers. It acknowledges that our separation from God and the rest of creation as part of the central cause of environmental problems. It recognizes the severity of the problems that we have, and it expresses hope and heeds the call to justice and commitment. And as those problems have become more and more severe over our lifetimes in this room, that last piece is ever important, isn't it? We have to be based in hope, or it's very easy to fail and to say, well, there's not really anything we can do, and give up. Last April, so about 16 months ago, the same church, ELCA, published an update to that statement that they wrote in 1993, specifically on climate. And they've developed a whole 24-page statement, social message, about climate change in particular. I'm going to draw some from that, but I have copies of that too. I have 2 copies, and I'll leave them here for you. It's also very easy to get online, and I really encourage you to go online and read this. It's a beautiful statement. It's not just an academic paper. It's actually a very, it would be something you could read as your part of your devotional. If you have a prayer life and practice a devotional life, this would be a great thing to read as part of that. It says in particular that we're at what's called a kairos moment. Maybe you've heard these terms in the church in your faith life, chronos and kairos. And chronos is just second after minute, hour and day after day. It's just the drumbeat of time that always goes on. And kairos are these particular moments where time seems to kind of stand still. And we have this kind of decision place in our life. And we personally have kairos moments. And the church is saying the church right now has a kairos moment. They say in the Greek New Testament, authors use kairos to emphasize a special moment in time when God visits God's people to offer them a unique opportunity for repentance and conversion, for change and decisive action. It is a time of judgment, and it's a moment of truth. So crisis, maybe you've heard the phrase, don't ever let a good crisis get away from you. Like, don't ever fail to take the opportunity of a good crisis. And maybe you have experienced crises in your life, and you can look back and say, well, that was a real turning point. And I had to make a decision. I didn't have a choice just to sit still. And look at how that changed my life and how I grew from that. Sometimes crises are really difficult and challenging, and they're painful and suffering. And sometimes they're not necessarily with suffering, but they offer us, we have to choose a path. And that's the path that the writers of this social statement say we're up against right now. It talks about how Christians are called to care for creation, like some of what you all have already said. How changes in the Earth's atmosphere are affecting our climate and life on Earth. So we actually look at the data and that science has given us. Many of those scientists, people of faith, Christians. We're facing a critical moment regarding the Earth's climate. It talks about how Christians should begin to respond to this moment. Gives some helpful insights from other social statements that the church has written. It teaches that climate change should be addressed and starts to tell us how we might address it. What are some of the best practices that we might do? And then how can we find hope and power to do that? I'm going to weave some of the teachings of this talk, this statement, in with the things that we typically talk with Christian congregations when I go to do these presentations. So what are some things we know about climate change? People in the room already know. You heard a talk from Inroads last week, and it's probably, if you're reading the papers or any kind of news, it's hard not to know something about climate change. What do we already know in this room?
It's getting hotter.
things are getting hotter. Yes,
It's real.
it's real. It's really happening.
The polar ice caps are melting.
Polar ice caps are melting, yes.
Running out of resources.
We're running out of resources. Talk more about what kind of resources.
Like coal and renewable sources are like disappearing. Petroleum is, we've reached and past peak production of petroleum.
Yep, we are seeing a decline in petroleum usage, yep.
There's things we can do about it.
There are things we can do about it, right? We have some power, some agency, yes.
Air quality.
Air quality is decreased, yes. And particularly in some places more than others, yeah.
I think like systems that we've gotten used to, as for example, where crops grow, and we're finding that maybe that's not true anymore. That some areas that used to grow this crop can't grow it anymore, and other areas can grow something they couldn't grow. So that's all changing.
Right, and it's changing, and it's changing at a pace that the human species has never seen before. So it's very difficult in our way of doing things to adjust quickly to those things. It's very difficult, for instance, for farmers to change their whole way of doing things because a crop won't grow the same way it did or needs different inputs or whatnot. Yeah. Other things?
More severe weather events.
We're seeing more severe weather events. As the heat in the atmosphere heats up, it's influencing particular weather events, not just the full big picture, right?
More forest fires.
More forest fires, right?
Animals, insects, different things are disappearing.
Right, we're seeing a lot of pressure on the created order of animals and insects because of those same changes that we're finding it difficult for ourselves to adapt to. They are also. And I think we're seeing a whole change in moose populations in Minnesota, for instance. They're all migrating north because of the change in the temperature and what that means for the plants that are available for them to eat, and what that means for the insects and parasites that, cause sickness and disease and whatnot for them. Yeah, good point.
The oceans are rising.
Oceans are rising, the ocean level is rising, yeah.
And it's probably affecting migration too, because people living in areas that get just too hot to live in anymore are going to have to go somewhere.
Right, yeah, we're seeing some human migration driven by the changes in weather patterns and yeah. You all really know a lot. You've got this subject down. You've brought up a lot of great things. The only thing I would kind of add to what we've talked about is the difference in causes and consequences. A lot of times when we talk about climate change, we go straight to the consequences for good reason. I mean, we're experiencing them, so that's the thing that we tend to think of. But when we talk with folks who are less familiar with the science or less trusting of the reality of climate change, if we just talk about consequences and we don't differentiate, then it may be that they're less able to trust us as a good source of information. And what I mean by this is, say for instance, I had a runny nose and a scratchy throat and watery eyes, then you might say, oh, well, he's got the flu. Or someone else might say, no, he's dealing with allergies. It's ragweed season or something like that. Or, no, he's just got a regular cold. So you can see that certain consequences can manifest from different causes. In climate change, with the robust research that's been done, we can look at actual causes and see that there's some science that shows, no, this is not the consequence of some other cause. This is actually caused by actual climate change and heating up of the atmosphere. So in general, just as you said, we got this thin layer of atmosphere around our planet that makes it livable. Actually, carbon helped us make it livable because it insulates the planet, and it keeps moisture and the right amount of heat in our atmosphere, and it makes it livable. Other planets don't have an atmosphere. They don't have life on them, right? So carbon's been really good for us. It's a great element. We're made of carbon. It's important. It's valuable. But when you put too much of it in the atmosphere, it starts to heat up, just as you all said. So that's the basic idea. But actually, scientists have found specific measurements of the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And we can see, this is a graph that shows the last 800,000 years. We can see that carbon for 800,000 years has been relatively stable. It's gone up, it's gone down, yep, but it's stayed within a particular band. And we know this from ice cores that scientists have drilled and pulled from the Antarctic. So, the ice in the Antarctic is like 1.5 kilometers thick. And so that's 800,000 years or more of ice, and they can measure in each of those strands of ice how many carbon parts per million are in that ice, so we're in the atmosphere. We know that we particularly in Minnesota know about this because Will Steger, as you may know, the great Minnesotan, he was the one that took the Antarctic expedition back in the 80s that started to collect this data. He was the first one. He wasn't the scientist that was actually collecting it, but he was the leader of the expedition that made it possible for those scientists to go and start pulling these ice cores. This is NASA data. And we can see that, wow, right around the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, those parts per million really start jacking up. And from 1950 forward, it just explodes way more than we've ever seen. For 800,000 years, that's more than human beings have been on the planet. Homo sapiens have only been on the planet about 300,000. And really, some people would say, as we know human beings, it's only been about 125,000. So that's a cause and a way we know that this. We're also seeing global average temperatures change dramatically. You can see the change here starting in 1940. This is average surface temperature, and we know it's just escalating up and up and up and up. So we have actual data that shows there's a cause, and that cause is carbon, and there's no explanation for the increase in carbon other than the fact that human beings are burning fossil fuels, carbon fuels, and releasing that carbon into the atmosphere. Scientists haven't come up with any other way that much carbon could get in the atmosphere other than human activity. So that's the cause consequences. So you all named tons of consequences. I don't think there's any consequences you didn't name. So you know this really well. And there's a list of some of the ones you all named. I guess the only thing I would add to what you all already said is that, and you know this as well, that the less wealth and means you have, the less able you are to adapt to the consequences. Which means that in our world and in our country, people who are poorer struggle more to adapt to those changes. Now, I heard a tragic story in Tanzania of a family who actually sent their daughter into the sex trade in the local city because of the drought had just decimated their farming. They had no food whatsoever, and that was the only way they could get food. That's a pretty dire example, but it does happen. And as Milo said, we're seeing a huge change in migration patterns, and that's because people just are desperate. They got nothing. For their area is just decimated, and they don't have the wealth and the security and the means to respond to those things. So in addition to the actual relationship with the earth, this is impacting our human relationships too. And there's a justice side of this that the scriptures call us to live into, to help our neighbor and to take care of one another and to work together as communities to get back to that abundance that the earth offers us. This document does a great job of talking about a way forward. It talks about that we as Christians have this wonderful template for repentance and forgiveness. And in the human project, it is very difficult for us to move forward without being forgiven and without releasing the pain and the difficulty of facing these things. And the social statement talks about 3 different types of that. Intra-generational justice, so that's what I was just talking about, ways of sharing abundance with one another and taking care of each other in the present. But now we have this, because of the climate crisis, we know we're thinking of these forward, future-oriented justice. So what do we owe our children and our children's children? What kind of justice spans across time? And what do we need to do to be honest and giving to those folks who come after us? And then also intersectional justice looks backwards to the past. So if we look back at the ways society hasn't been functioning well, and there's been injustice in the past, say around slavery, where a certain segment of the population was enslaved, and that has still carried on with consequences now, and those people have less generational wealth, then they're going to be less able to respond to climate change. The same could be said perhaps for the way land patterns were settled here in Minnesota as Minnesota was settled, and indigenous folks not having rights to their land and that kind of thing. So we have to look at all three of those. So check in with yourself. If we've really done a good job of digging into the problem, how's that make you feel?
There's more work to do.
There's more work to do. It makes you feel invigorated to get to work? How about others? Sad? Something that makes you feel sad? Yeah. I don't know about you, it makes me feel a little dumb. Like, gosh, I did read about this back in the early 90s. Why didn't I do anything about it then?
Makes me sad that there's so many people that think that climate change is not real.
Oh my
It
God.
makes you sad, yeah. You might feel frustrated or angered that other people aren't paying attention to this, yeah. Yeah, it is frustrating that this issue has become politicized. I mean, I kind of joke that, Al Gore may have done the worst about climate change because he was a political figure that brought this up, and then it became a Democrat-Republican thing when it's actually a human thing, not a political thing.
Yeah, it makes me sort of anxious because it's like we're running out of time to deal with this.
Anxious, yeah, exactly. Well, you all are not alone. Yale has done a 17-year study now, 18-year study called the Yale Climate Communication Survey. They've done this extensive polling all across the world, really. And in the U.S., they found kind of 6 major groups of people in how they respond to climate change, from alarm to concerned to cautious, all the way to dismissive, like it doesn't even exist. And you can see over here on the left is 2017, over here on the right is 2021, and you can see that the alarmed is the category that's increasing the most. They've come out, this is an older, I should update this with a newer graph, but they've actually come out and now I think it's 36%. So you can see, well, it's moving up. And then they've also found that, and this is also, I probably need to update this also, but you can see, well, of the people who are alarmed, really only about 30%, 35% are active. So the rest of us are, well, we know it's happening, but we don't know what to do. We're not doing anything. And then some of us are like, well, we're willing to do something, but help me out. What do I do? That's why our organization exists. We're not the only ones that exist to help with this issue, but we're one of them. So let's talk about some of the things that you can do to respond to climate change. Well, one of the things you can do is start to think about, how do I do this in a way that's sustainable? And this is a great way of thinking about it, I think. You can think about what brings you joy, what's the work that needs doing, and what are you good at? And where those 3 things come together, boy, that's your sweet spot. If you do that, you're going to be sustainable. So there's so many ways to get involved with climate change, it can be a little overwhelming. So start to think about what's going to bring me joy as I do this work? What do I like doing? And what do I have some skills at? Maybe from my previous career or from who I know or what I do or what my hobby is. And then what's something that needs doing? You all heard the inroads, so some of you all like to think data and you like to think big picture. And this project drawdown is a great way to look at that big picture. This is a project that hundreds of scientists have looked at the solutions and examined exactly where we need to change things and which sectors of the economy and whatnot can change to make the most difference. So if you like data, Project Drawdown is a great option. And then this is our method. The M&IPL method is to work simultaneously in 3 legs of the stool. So we say the spiritual, the practical, and the systemic. Spiritual is what we're doing today, talking about it, relating to one another, telling stories, being engaged, strengthening our relationships with God, with one another. Practical solutions are things that measurably reduce the amount of carbon you put into the atmosphere. So everything from changing your light bulbs to LEDs, to driving less and biking and walking, to changing the things you buy in your house or use in your house, or all that kinds of things. And systemic changes, trying to make those changes on a large scale. Working with your school board, working with your city council, maybe advocating at the government level, at the state level, at legislative, legal, working with the business association, any kind of larger structure that makes those changes. Here are some spiritual ideas. Some of these also have practical implications or systemic implications, but they're all ideas to fuel us and give us encouragement and strengthen us in our relationship with God, who's the real source of whether we turn this around. We've got to tap into the desire of God to heal the planet in order to be in the flow and do this work. Some practical ideas. Anything, you can look at your home and your life and see, where do I have a relationship with carbon fuels, and how could I change that over to non-carbon fuels? So that's kind of a broad matrix or filter to think about this. So for instance, I have a relationship with heating my house. It's natural gas, or methane gas is what it really is. And methane is very bad for the earth. It really causes a lot of climate change. So I'm looking at ways I can heat my home that don't burn things. I can shift over to electricity, and that electricity can be made by renewable energy. We passed a law, the state of Minnesota, in 2023 that says all of our electricity will be generated by non-carbon fuels by the year 2040. So the more things in my home that I can shift over to electricity, the more I can trust that by 2040, it's going to be made by non-carbon fuels. Transportation, plastics, we can try to eliminate plastics because plastics are made from carbon fuels, oil and gas and those types of things. You can get an energy audit for your house and see how efficient your house is. I just got insulation put in my house. It's a 1950s house, and got new insulation, and I improved the efficiency of my home by 36%. So I haven't gotten the electric heating, but I'm using 36% less fuel to burn to heat my home now. And it's cozier, it's more comfortable. So I just did in the summer. I haven't experienced what the benefit's going to be, but I have experienced the AC working a lot better, so I'm cooler. If you're really interested, again, Drawdown's a great resource. They put together 20 high-impact climate actions, and you might be surprised. I don't know if this is big enough for you to see. The top 2 are with respect to how we eat. So the first one is more plant-rich diets are better for lower carbon intensity, and the reason for that is it takes a lot more carbon fuels to grow the food and harvest it and feed animals than it does to grow crops that we can eat as vegetables. So that's one, reducing our food waste. In the U.S., we have a lot of food waste, both from our houses and from our just our food system in general, grocery stores and restaurants. Some of the others is solar systems are really good. Insulation is number 4. LED lighting is number 5. Recycling is way down the list, number 8 or 9. So you might be surprised by which ones are more impactful. Here's some systemic ideas. Systemic is a little harder to do. I don't know about you, but until I got into this work, I didn't really know anything about the legislative process. And I didn't really care either. I just thought, all those folks, they're just out for themselves, and the legislative process is, I don't want to go anywhere near the Capitol. But I've come to see the value in working over time. The payoffs for this kind of work are much longer term. They can take years to get to a good outcome, but they can be huge. The outcomes can be really large. I think it was 15 years, folks have been working on this concept of clean energy by a certain date, and we finally passed it in 2023. Our organization helps put together campaigns so that you can just plug in. You don't have to know everything about the issue. We can teach you, and you can form a group from Elk River Lutheran that just shows up. You also have a Lutheran advocacy office that's really good. Tammy Warhol, she's fantastic, and your office is working on some really good things around climate. So you can go that way. You can work in your neighborhood. You can work at your if you're staff on a corporation or a company, you can work to kind of change the practices of your company. Any kind of thing like that can really improve what you're doing at that structural level. And it's also helpful sometimes to work at that larger level, because if you only work at the personal level in your own household, you can get defeated pretty quickly. You can say, God, this is really hard. It's a real pain in the rear to try to get rid of single-use plastics. I can't get them out of my life. They're everywhere. How can I change that? But there's actually a group of people that are working on changing that at a systemic level, so that companies have to participate more in the costs of dealing with those and get those out of the waste stream. So here's a little graphic that shows the value of working together and organizing in these systemic fashions. Here are some of the campaigns we work on. We work on not just legislative work, but we work on policies with the utilities, trying to get the utilities to do better. We work on reparations. We have a reparations lab for working with Native folks to try and figure out ways that we can support them and honor treaties in a better way. Just a variety of different things that we work on in that area. And we have a program that will support your congregation. If you want to build a team that works on these issues, we can support that group. Workshops, other things like that, webinars, information, resources, that kind of thing. So as you know, every action matters, every bit of warming matters, every year matters, every choice matters. Everything we do has an impact and is moving us to a better place. And so I'll end with this statement from this social message. We believe God yearns, that's yearns, I'm typo there, I didn't get the N in there, yearns and strives for Earth's ecological well-being, and we trust that God's faithfulness alone sustains the church and renews our faith, hope, and love. So, do we have any time for questions or discussion? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Does anybody want to ask or throw out a comment? Or yeah.
One thing I was thinking about as you were talking is how important it is to model and educate our youth. Most of this is what we as adults can do.
Right.
But I think including the youth in this process is going to teach them and show them what it means to be a citizen, but also make them aware of what's happening.
I think that's a really good point. And just a few points of connection with our organization around that. One, we have a youth leadership training program. It's focused on BIPOC youth because we see that's some of the neighborhoods and areas that are most experiencing the effects of climate change. So we try to teach those youth and get them active in their communities. We've also found in this that you all, a lot of folks who are older, actually have practices that you learned as a child or inherited from your grandparents that are much better for the earth. They're much simpler. They're not as wasteful because it was, we grew up in a simpler time. And the older that you are, probably the more simpler time you grew up in, and the ways you're more conditioned to live a little more simply and thriftily in your life. And you can actually teach kids a lot about that, who have grown up in a time of just extreme abundance and single-use, throwaway kind of society, right? So there's a lot of good crossover there that can happen at a congregational level. Intergenerational work along that can be fantastic. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
As someone who's active in politics, I'm with the DFL, and we do have an environmental caucus in there. We have worked to get the party to be more environmentally friendly. But an example, when we had tried to implement a resolution for Prove It First on the mines and the boundary water, Labor got there in an uproar and threatened to walk out of the party.
Yeah.
So it's just like, we want to be environmentally caucus, but if it has any impact on labor, Labor says you will not get that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Just in case you couldn't hear all that, this speaker's talking about the conflicts that can happen within a party that says it's environmentally supportive, and particularly around labor. So a couple of points of information about that you may already know, but you were talking particularly about the Prove It First bill, where it's incumbent upon companies that want to put in extractive industries like mining or oil or any kind of industry really, to show that they are not going to have an adverse environmental impact before the project actually goes forward. And you would think, well, isn't that the way it is right now? And isn't that why we have a pollution control agency? But it's not, actually. It's not incumbent upon them to prove that first. There are environmental impact statements, but they are pretty toothless. They don't have a lot of teeth. The second point you're making is that there appears to be a division between labor and environmentalists. Like environmentalists don't want any jobs and labor don't care about the environment, which is not the case. A lot of people in labor care very much about the environment. And a lot of people in the environment know the only way we're going to go forward is by creating an economy that generates jobs. The Democratic Party at its best has done that. The Inflation Reduction Act is a good example where there's been an enormous amount of money pumped into creating the green economy, which has created thousands of jobs in the country already. But it can appear in the short term that not allowing a mining project to go forward or whatnot, is a jobs killer. And that's why labor, the organized labor tends to be against that in some respects. But two things that I would encourage you to think about when you're doing that is, one, what kind of jobs are going to be created and how long-term are they? It's surprising that the more and more mechanized these industries have become, the fewer and fewer jobs actually get created. So for instance, Line 3, the pipeline that goes across Minnesota, that was touted as a big jobs creator. In reality, it created very few jobs. It created short-term jobs for the construction and implementation of the pipeline. It created almost no jobs long-term that continued to do that. And what we received by allowing Enbridge to put that pipeline through is about 200 different places along that line where it's damaged the water quality and the environment. And we're also seeing short-term gains in tax base for that project to those counties, but actually our government overanalyzed the amount of taxes, and Enbridge won in court to get those taxes paid back. And then those counties were bereft of their budgets because they were having to pay back the taxes that they had already gotten from Enbridge because they lost in court. So it's just, we shouldn't just assume that one party is the perfect party when it comes to climate change. That's not the case, and we need systemic action across the board always to make those changes. Yeah.
What kinds of things have you seen other congregations do from a physical infrastructure perspective to their churches, and has there been any downstream impact onto the behavior of the congregation?
Yeah, great question. I've seen a number of congregations do sophisticated analytics on their buildings, their building performance, and improve the efficiency of their building, which leads to better comfort and for the folks who show up, and lower utility costs and less carbon emissions. So that can be a complex series of steps. It takes a lot of work, it takes time, and it takes bringing the right experts in. We do have some resources for that. We can put a congregation in touch with people that can do that. A lot of that is free at the beginning. You can get free information. So you can get people that are experts who will come in and give you an audit and kind of help you start to get your hands around it. And then there may be some cost involved. Oftentimes there are low interest or no interest loans to start implementing some of those things. So everything from better HVAC controls that change the way a space is measured and monitored to make sure it's on when people are here and off when people aren't, that kind of thing, to lighting, to insulation. I've had about 20 congregations install solar systems, and they're paying nothing for electricity now. They might be paying a loan off for the system they bought, but they're not paying for electricity. Those types of things a lot of folks have done. There's some trickle down from that type of work to households, but really what works with households is creating groups of people to talk about what they're doing and what's working in their house. It can be difficult to know, what contractor do I call that knows how to deal with HVAC, or who do I get to help me install insulation, or where do I go to get an energy audit? And when you get groups of people together and one person's done one thing and one person's done another and one person's done another, and you share that information, it can be really motivating and helpful. So. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Again, thanks a lot. Yeah, if you want to know more about our organization, just put your email here. There's some materials here on this little round table here if you're interested, or brochures, that kind of stuff. And thank you so much to Elk River for engaging this issue and inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you.